All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Um, my name is Moya Kirker. I am joined by my colleagues Bob Vey and Mieko Palazzo. Um, and we're going to be talking about uncovering your university's history in the archives, a little collaboration between the three of us and some others in our Special Collections and Archives unit. So today we're going to talk about the class that we designed and the project that the students did. SERC, our Special Collections and Research Center folks are going to talk about their role in the course. We'll talk about how the students received the course, areas of improvement that we've identified as we go into the fall semester, and then some big takeaways. And then, of course, there will be time for Q&A as well. So we're going to start with some background on the course. So we're at George Mason University, which is in Fairfax, Virginia, which is in the larger DC metro area. We are a very large R1 public institution, high acceptance rate, high retention rate, majority minority student population. Just to give you some context of the setting. And a young institution, which Bob will get into as well, only about, oh goodness, just over 50 years old. Right, Bob? I'm seeing you not say I'm wrong.
Oh yeah, no. Depends on whether you cite when we became independent, which was about 50 years ago, or when we started as part of the University of Virginia, which was closer to 65 years ago or so.
Great. Thank you. I was like, I had the 58 year in my head, and I was like, that's longer than 50 years. Okay, so my role in the libraries is as the teaching and learning team lead. So I am an instruction librarian by trade and by practice. And in that role, I have been the liaison to the Honors College for many years. And I have taught courses within their college on research methods, and then I designed a class about access issues in education. And I was feeling like this itch to do something new and different. And I was inspired by a conversation with our history librarian about the concept of building a Wikipedia page or a site for the university about the history of the university. So that was sort of like a little seed that got planted in my brain that I rolled with. I had a really good relationship with the assistant dean of faculty and curriculum development for the Honors College. He and I sat down in December 2023, and I was like, I have this idea. And it was basically that, like, what if students use the archives to build a Wikipedia page about the history of the university? He was on board. So then it was getting buy-in from our Special Collections Research Center. So I had a conversation with the director. She was interested. We brought in all the members of SERC, including Bob and Mieko here, to talk about whether it would be feasible or not. So notice this, December 2023, this course that we're going to talk about was spring 2025. So well over a year before the class took off, these conversations began. So it was developed into a section of Honors 360, which is like essentially the capstone level course in the Honors College, where students are, the topics of the course are multidisciplinary. It's supposed to be team-based with some like experiential learning components if possible. The class size for this is typically 22 students enrolled, but I asked for and received special permission to have a max of 15 students. And that is primarily because of the size of Special Collections, the materials that they would be handling, and also that it was we were sort of billing it as a pilot course. And so with all of these sort of logistical pieces in place, we had a year to plan. And from my perspective, as someone who has the teaching librarianship background, I spent what I would say a good part of the year is like reading, learning, and talking about Special Collections and archives with everyone that I possibly could. Because my knowledge was very, very basic. I'd taken like one class in library school more than a decade prior. And I'm not going to pretend that I knew all the ins and outs to be a super successful teacher without some support. which led eventually to the class. Next slide, please. And so this is a description of the course. So it's Honors 360, and the official title is George Mason's University's History in the Archives. And I'll read this to you. So this is what students see when they're choosing to register for a class, and what ends up being on the syllabus as well. So the course will explore the history of George Mason University using the University Library's archives. We will learn how archives work, what knowledge we can learn from archival records, and critique what is missing from the archival record. In teams, you'll uncover an aspect of the university's history using the archives and create a publicly accessible digital exhibit. This is a project for the university libraries, and so you may even choose to explore a project related to creating and sustaining a stable platform for the work produced in this class, for example, a wiki site or Omeka. This class is for any student interested in working with primary sources, learning more about the university and its community, or building workflows for a new technology project. So some key pieces to point out here, and you might be like, didn't you just say wiki site? We learned, or like in our conversations about the feasibility of this class, a wiki site did not seem feasible to get off the ground within a year. And we also didn't want to explore a brand new product without sort of having a proof of concept for the course in general. And so we landed on, let's have the students create Omeka exhibits to see how the course runs as a whole. Does this have some teeth to it, et cetera? I had the option for students to not do Omeka sites, to work on, like infrastructure plans for something, but I'll note that every single student wanted to work with archival materials and did the Omeka site in the end. And then lastly, the last sentence is really important because the Honors College features students from all majors. And I wanted to make sure like students in IT or computer science didn't feel like this course wasn't for them. And we had a very wide variety of types of students with different majors in the course. So the next slide will show what the big project was that they were working towards. And so the percentages here relate to how much of the final grade was part of each piece. So this big digital archival project was 70% of their grade. And that sounds like a lot, but it was broken down into these much more manageable chunks. So they had to do a project pitch as a group. What is their idea of their archival project about the history of George Mason University? They had to draft a project plan and do a consult with Bob and Mieko, essentially being like, here's our idea, here's what we think we can find, here's what we want to find. Does this make sense? Are we missing anything, etc.? They had to storyboard their Omeka site and give a mini presentation about that in class. That was more of like a, please don't save this till the very last minute, do some work kind of assignment. And then a final presentation where they could just do a PowerPoint about what they found for their project. So they didn't have to have the final Omeka sites done at that point. And then what they created for an Omeka exhibit, including the items, the metadata, the narrative, documentation, et cetera, was their final product. And so I want to outline how we got to this sort of final product on the next slide by how we scaffolded the content in the class. And so this is sort of like the 7 pieces of the course. They are not equally weighted, right? Like some had more weeks of a 15-week course than others. But this is sort of how we got them from knowing very little, like literally very little about the university, to being able to create sort of in-depth projects about an aspect of the history. So the first few weeks, we just talked about George Mason University history. SERC had already created so many like really helpful resources about the history of the university. There was like a walking tour. There was an article by our history librarian about who is George Mason and like it's his connection to the university. So we spent a few weeks just sort of getting a baseline understanding of the university. Then the next part was what we'll call Archives 101. And Mieko and Bob will go into this more momentarily, but basically teaching them the very basics of how do you handle, touch, ask for, use archival materials? How are they organized? Why is that important, etc.? And I'll put here part of the missing 30% of the coursework. During this time, they also had to do an archival exhibit assignment where they just went and found they had the option to do it in person, but everyone picked an online exhibit to go look, analyze, critique, etc., to just sort of get a sense of what online exhibits look like. Then there was some time where we formed groups. They figured out what topic, what aspect of the university history they wanted to explore. There was time narrowing down the scope of that project. Some did that better than others, where they were starting to work with the materials. Then we had a section where they were learning how to use Omeka, adding things to Omeka. We had a few weeks where we were talking about how do you tell stories with archival materials. And then the last chunk of the class was like in SCRC, working with the materials in class, working in groups, trying to come up with their narratives and their stories, etc. So it's a very project-oriented class with most of the content at the front so that they could be successful in their teamworks at the end. And next, we're going to talk about some of that Archives 101 and what SCRC brought to the table, which was a lot.
Thank you, Moya. So I'm going to start us off to sort of talk about how SCRC got involved in this collaboration with Moya. But as Moya was saying, we started these conversations like really early on. I think Moya had a conversation with our our director of SCRC in like October or November 2023. And then we all came into the conversation around January, February of 2024 to begin planning. And as she already mentioned, the first thing that we kind of talked about was like the feasibility and bandwidth of our team. So at the time and still now, I kind of serve as the primary instruction person in SCRC. My like official title is the Research Services Librarian, but encompasses reference and instruction. So that just meant that the bulk of the load was falling on me, and I have amazing, really supportive colleagues who were willing to help when needed. But I was doing all of the communicating with faculty, creating lists of materials to pull, pulling the things, doing the instruction classes. So we knew that it would be difficult for me to kind of be now also signing on to being part of an embedded class on my own. And we also knew we wanted to use University Archives materials in this class. So we thought it was a perfect fit to have Bob come in as well as the university archivist. So he could provide his extensive knowledge on the collections, and then it would just make it easier for me to kind of know that that workload would be shared between the two of us and also in collaboration with Moya. And in our initial conversations, we started out kind of just talking about like what would make sense in terms of how many times they needed to come in and look at things and what we needed to talk about, which we'll kind of get into what we actually talked about in the next slide. But we started with just thinking how many days would be realistic, both for us and then also for what made sense for the students. And we also knew from the start that there was a possibility of like fluctuation because we weren't really sure. We could start out saying they're going to come in for 5 work days, but they might need more time. And one thing we really wanted to minimize was like individual appointments for students, since our reading room coverage can be spotty, especially at that time. Due to like limited staffing. We just sort of were like, okay, we want to minimize them coming in on their own. So let's have full class time where we can pull everything and then we can be there for them if they have any questions. So we essentially just blocked off like every Thursday from 3 to 4, so that if we needed to add or remove things during the semester is fairly easy for us. And we knew not to like schedule anything else during those times. Another thing we kind of worked on together was creating learning outcomes. So Moya sort of was really collaborative in that she wanted our opinions on the archive side of things, like what is the most important thing for them to get out of this in relation to learning about archival records. And so we talked about how we wanted students to learn about archival principles and best practices and to access and analyze primary sources. So we wanted them to both understand how things functioned, learn the tools for finding information, and then using what they found to create this research project. Which like can feel kind of daunting because it's a lot of people coming in who have no archives background. I believe none of them did. And so we're kind of thinking about like what is feasible within the time frame that we have and like and we felt that that was realistic. So then I also contributed a bit of like readings and like web content for Moya to share with the students alongside one of my colleagues to kind of bulk up the content that they could see outside of the classroom to help with their understanding, because we knew, again, there's a lot of things that we're trying to teach them and we're not going to be able to have all the time in class. So how can we supplement the class time with beneficial information? And then Bob and I were able to work together to select materials that we wanted students to look at to give them sort of like initial ideas for the project. And Bob will speak more on what we kind of pulled for that, but everything was from the University Archives collection. And then on top of that, Moya was really great in like integrating us into the class further by like adding us into the Canvas webpage so we could see like the assignment information, the student questions, any like messages or notes they put in there. But she was also great in that she was like, I will handle the Canvas, like doing the announcements and putting all the things in there. So really, I was just there to be like a backup of like knowing what's going on and being involved in that way, but not any of the grading or anything like that, which was helpful. And then lastly, sort of as part of our initial conversations, Moya asked for like a lot of feedback in relation to the assignments that she was creating. So we were able to give her our thoughts on like some of the worksheets and the final project criteria, so that we could, from our perspective, say, oh, maybe this doesn't need to be, we don't need to have a certain number of materials. Maybe we just focus on X something. And so that was really helpful. And she was very consistently like sending us information about the class and like having us be prepared. So a main theme that will be coming up today is like how communicative this process was and how like helpful that was for us to be able to do a good job in relation. But yeah, those are my notes for now. So I'll hand it over to Bob to talk about the class and what we were showing to the students.
Hi, gang. University Archives has 158 distinct collections that make up that record group, and they're primarily arranged by the creating academic or administrative unit. And these records range from 1957 to the present. So our class primarily used records from collections which contained really long-running series of records covering many, many years. And so these records included a lot of the things you see here: school newspaper, yearly statistical reports, yearbooks, the university photograph collection, all kinds of materials that really kind of help chronicle the university's history. Next slide. There you go. So with 15 folks that really had not been in an archives before, we kind of started them from the ground up. So we taught them what archivists do and the different phases of how we take care of records, how we bring records in, how we store records, how we preserve records, how we describe records. we took them behind the scenes. We took them back to our processing area, showed them how we do exhibits, digitization. We brought them back to the stacks area where I am right now. Hopefully the lights don't turn out on me, since I haven't moved here, and showed them kind of how we store things, how everything has a place so that it can get back to, to where it was once it's been used. We taught them how to properly conduct research in an archive. That is, requesting materials, waiting patiently while they arrive, handling them very carefully, knowing that they're under supervision as they're using the materials. We taught them how to use finding aids and our archive space CMS. So we tried to kind of show them what we do, every piece that belongs in the equation. We did give them a grounding in the history of George Mason. That's kind of one of my pet fun things to do. One of my hang-ups is that I really do collect university history, both in the brain and, here in the building. So I talked to them kind of at length about kind of how we started from very little, 17 students in 1957 to 40,000 today. Um, and then we helped them use the materials in kind of what could be best described as sort of like a mass group situation. So we used our seminar room, and that's kind of what you're seeing in the picture here. And we had 15 students, and we had 5 big tables. So and they worked in groups. So each group was working on a particular subject and was looking at materials pertaining to that subject. So we would pull, anywhere from 5 to 10 carts of material for a Thursday afternoon. And everybody would take their place at their table and they would start researching on the materials. And we all kind of stood guard at different parts if people had questions. To me, that was the fastest hour, you know, in television because literally I would go from table to table to table to table to table and hey, what's this? What's that, Bob? Is there anything else we could look at, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it just, and I had mentioned this to Moya and Mieko, it just seemed to fly by that hour and 15 minutes that we had with the students. And uh for the most part, I think them having kind of personal attention from the 3 of us really kind of helped their research along because they weren't in a situation where, what is this? No one's here to help me, etc. So I think that kind of that was really another successful part of the class is that, that they got, 1 to 5 attention, very, throughout the time that they were here. And I guess next, Mieko.
Okay, yeah, and then we just wanted to show some other pictures of them. So on the right or on the left side, there's another picture of the class like delving into the records. And like Bob was just saying, we sort of were trying to like partly replicate the researcher experience so they could understand what it's like going into an archive and the rules you need to follow. Obviously, it's different in every institution, any place you go to, but some of those like guiding principles that you'll often find at places. So I'm asking them to not bring their bags in, only using pencils, not having food or drinks on the tables with them. We talked about how they could take pictures of things and to please take pictures of things because that would help them later on. And then we also, as Bob was just mentioning, we had them send us pull lists for ahead of the class so we could prep things ahead of time. So we would put them on cards for each group, put them at tables, and then if they had maybe 1 or 2 things they want to pull during the class, we could do that. But we wanted to really be able to spend the bulk of the time them looking at things instead of us like going around pulling things. And that's typically how when people come to the reading room, we will ask for collections list ahead of time so that they just have that time to look at things. So again, it was like another like good practice for them to learn. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, these are photos from our exhibit opening for our World War I exhibit that we had in the spring, that they were able to come to. At the opening, we had a talk by a GMU history professor, and they got to listen to a really amazing processing archivist, Megan Glassbrenner, who had put the exhibit together and was talking about her process and why she put certain things together, et cetera. And Moya had mentioned they had an assignment earlier in the semester where they've been asked to go to an archival exhibit and kind of discuss what they found. And so we found like them being able to come to this opening and like take notes to understand like kind of thought process for putting an exhibit together was really beneficial to them. And especially also they knew they had to do a presentation at the end of the semester. And so seeing how someone would talk about the exhibit that they put together, how that they could use aspects of that for their own classwork. And so, oh my gosh, I'm sorry about these slides. Okay, and then moving on to Moya.
Yeah, and I think one thing to add too about the exhibition is like the timing worked out very perfectly, unplanned, that it was at the same time as the class. And the students asked if they could go to this instead of like our regulars class, which was like just a regular work day. And it's like, how do you, these students who started not really knowing anything about archives being like, we really want to go to this, can we? And then they all showed up and they all interacted, and it was great. And as we were talking about the fall, even just being like, is there a way to coordinate the next exhibit opening with the class for the same experience? It's just like amazing partnership opportunity. But yeah, so the students handled and reacted really well, which is like always a concern when you're doing something for the first time, because like I've developed classes and the first time can sometimes just be, I don't want to say a train wreck, but like some carts might get derailed. And you never quite know, like I know everything that's going wrong, right? And it's unclear how much the students know is going wrong or unplanned, etc. But I was very upfront with them. Let me know as we go along what's working, what's not. This is an experiment, and they were all game for it. So it worked out really well. But yeah, they were so excited about the archives and working with the materials. Like by the time we got to here are the things that you requested, they were into it. Even the students who never seemed into the class were like digging in and excited, to the point where they wanted more. So they wanted to learn how to do oral histories because some of them had somewhat newer to Mason's history topics, and there were people on campus who were either involved in, for example, the creation of the LGBTQ Resource Center, or just one group did a project on the haunted Mason, so stories of ghost stories around campus, and they went around and they talked to people about the stories that they'd heard or experienced or learned. So Bob was able to help give a quick lesson on how to do an oral history with them. An interesting problem emerged about the current political climate, about fear of some of their subjects. So there was a group that did LGBTQ history on campus. There was a group that was talking about desegregation efforts on campus. And they were a little worried about, could they do this? Would they get in trouble? Was their name going to be attached to it, et cetera? And I think they are all very valid concerns. And what we ended up doing is I asked the students to self-identify if they wanted their name to be on the final public product or not. If they opted out, you'll see in the Omeka records, it is just now student with the course and semester. And 2 students opted out, and that's perfectly okay. It was a very easy accommodation to make. Accommodation is not even the right word, right? They were very, 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 very open about ways to improve the class, both sort of throughout the course, in the evaluations I received, in conversations we had before and after. which is really helpful. So it was things that were actually constructive, like this assignment didn't really help, but like maybe if you did this, it would be better. Or a big thing, which you'll hear about momentarily, is figuring out topics sooner, which if anyone's ever worked with students working on topics for a long term, is like every class has this problem, and there's only so much help sometimes you can do, and so much leading you can do, but it is good to know collectively that that was an issue. And this is going to be might be funny, but like most of these students were like juniors and seniors, and the number of them that said, "Wow, research really takes a lot of time," was very funny to me, because I think we all know this, right? But like, and they've certainly done research as college students, but I think not this sort of primary source, real hands in it, that they sort of had this very realization. It's like, oh, like my professors weren't lying to me. It does take time and energy and work. So I thought that was entertaining. But I also wanted to share some, in their own words, in their final reflections, some of the things that the students said. So I have 3 examples here that I think are, I went through them all again, and they sort of encompass what most students took away. So this student says, I didn't know what to expect coming into this course, but I learned a couple of skills about archival science itself. The first is that I am more acquainted with accessing and using archives as a resource. I assume that while not all archives are similar to Mason's, the process is similar enough so that I can access them through the same means. The second skill would be the proper procedures that someone should take to conduct a good oral history. Archivist Bob did a wonderful job in teaching the class how to not only conduct them, but how to formulate questions and reach out to interviewees. With the support of you, Ms. Kirker, and the almost infinite knowledge of Bob and Mieko, this semester has completely changed the way I think about history and storytelling. This was a nursing student, by the way. Throughout the semester, I often found myself talking about this class with friends and classmates. I genuinely enjoyed the hands-on research aspect of the course, from using A-Space, picking up boxes, and having to look through every document. It felt exciting to uncover real stories and be able to share them in a creative and fun way. And this last one is particular. So this was a graduating student who was a bioengineering major. I found that the research techniques I learned in this class, including identifying primary sources, analyzing documents in their historical context, and asking open-ended research questions, could be applied to my other academic work. So it's like, what, to me as an instructor, like what other evidence do you need that like primary source research helps everyone? Because here we have a bioengineering student who found deep value in it as well. And that's just to share, like, you know, I think it's always helpful to know that the goal you set out to do is working in some way beyond just the final product that students create. But there are some takeaways and some improvements we can make, which Mieko is going to talk about.
Yeah, thank you, Moya. So yeah, as you can see, like from the feedback that we received and just our general feelings around it, like we think it went really well and we're really happy about the outcome, and just seeing students so excited about archives and like Mason history. But there are still areas we think can definitely be improved upon, and so we're looking forward to that in the fall when we teach this again. But the first thing has to do with topics, as Moya was mentioning a little bit ago. So we noticed it was taking students much longer than originally mapped out for them to narrow down their topics. And some of them seemed to really struggle in terms of finding direction, or just like trying too hard, I think, to make the materials work for the topic they had, instead of using the materials to create their topic. So they're like, oh, I really want to look into this. And then when they didn't find anything related to it, they'd still try to kind of make things work where it wasn't working. So Bob did a lot of sort of investigating those concerns and being like, okay, well, if you're interested in this, how can we point you in this direction? And maybe you could look at these things. But it's because it was kind of just taking a long time, I think a lot of them then felt rushed. And a reason why we had sort of started out with like different collections that we pulled, but we didn't really give them clear topics because I think we just wanted them to have options and to feel that they were really creating their own research project. But we're thinking that we need to have just some parameters around it in the next iteration. So maybe having like predetermined topics for the class and like presenting them as a starting off point. Because again, we don't want to limit them, but sort of giving them examples of what the work could be. And now it's also nice because we have this class research from last semester, so we can be like, these students looked at this, and maybe you are interested in doing something that branches off of something that they did, or just these are the kinds of things that you can find. And then we also want to try to work on helping students connect topics across collections, because a lot of them seem to find like one collection with materials and then was like, this is it. This is everything that this has to say about my topic that I'm interested in, instead of thinking, you know, maybe this could be maybe their understanding of a space. Like we need to help them to sort of like figure out how to search more efficiently in there, or it could just be that because they haven't had any primary research background, they're sort of just like, it's too overwhelming, this is what I've got, and let's continue forward. So we're going to think about how can we help them search in unexpected places and see those connections cross collections. Another thing we noticed once the Omeka projects were completed and submitted was there was sort of a lack of consistency when it came to both citations and other metadata information in Omeka. We had at least one metadata session during the course of the class, but we were thinking we should expand on this, potentially creating an activity where we ask students to find things from the last class's exhibits to kind of show them, like, if someone isn't citing something at the collection box and folder level, it is very difficult to find what you're looking for. And so hopefully doing something like that can help them to really internalize that information. Because I know we spent a lot of the class time talking about citations are so important, but you can only do so much for students to really like take that information in. And that's not to say they weren't citing things, it was just that lack of consistency that we noticed. So yeah, we're thinking also we'll try to do our metadata session before they go to the Omeka workshop, so that they have sort of a baseline to start at. I think that's something that we didn't do this last time around, and so we're thinking we'll reorder that. And then let's see. Oh, Moya already kind of touched on this, but so many of the students were really interested in collecting oral histories for their final projects, and Bob was able to integrate a class in for those that had that interest, but it could be good to just include that as part of the course, so that if, you know, we don't have to last minute do things, we're just like, this is about oral histories, this is how you use them, this is how you can conduct them. So that's another thing. And then another thing that Moya also already talked about, but we were thinking about trying to coordinate the exhibit opening with the class. It really worked so seamlessly last time. We're thinking it would be good for them to have that experience, since it was really beneficial and they just really enjoyed it. And obviously when students are enjoying things, we're like, yes, let's do more of that, so we can really like connect things for them too, in terms of what they're doing in the class and what it can look like in a physical setting. And yeah, so those are some of the things. I think there's still like lots of other ways in which we're kind of thinking about how we can improve the class. But I want to end with kind of like our final takeaways from the experience. So one is just like how important it is to establish an open dialogue between instructors and also the class. Moya truly did an amazing job of like checking in with us throughout the class, and just being such a like team member with us, which is really special. And then, but then also, as you're saying, kind of like having clarity and transparency with the students in the class, making sure they knew it was a pilot class, like making sure they knew we hadn't done any of these things before, and that we were all kind of learning together, and they really like took that on and were happy to be a part of it. And I think that helped with the progression of the class too. In a similar vein, we recognize just how so much of this is just an iterative process, similar to research. So we were like constantly reflecting on how things went and kind of thinking about what the students were asking and how we could change things around. And so it's really in the process of this class, like nothing was absolute, and it gave us a lot of freedom to like pivot when necessary. We were like, oh, let's add a class. Oh, let's talk about this. And so that was really nice. And then lastly, maybe most importantly, was just like how wonderful it was to work together as a group. Since I've been at SCRC, I haven't worked on a class that was like so integrated into the archives, and it was just really great to work with Moya and to learn from her skills as an instructor. She's a wonderful instructor. And then on the flip side, for her to be able to learn about archives, as she was saying in the beginning. But it was just like a really meaningful collaboration, and it makes me excited to do it again in the fall, but then also to think about, are there potentials for future collaborations with other either library instructors or other faculty members where we really integrate more into the classroom. But yes, we're always better together. And then finally, I'll leave everyone with a link to the Omeka site to check out. And I think Moya is going to put it in the chat, but thank you so much for coming. And we're about at time, which is great. So we're happy to take any questions. We'd also love to hear from folks doing similar work and have any insights that they'd like to share from their experiences. Yeah, thank you.
It looks like there is a question in chat for y'all.
Awesome. Can you read it? Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say I can read if you want me to.
Okay,
the class assignment included identifying gaps in the collection. Since you could show them a limited amount of material for the class, how did they formulate these observations, and what role did the archivist play in this?
Yeah, so they looked at a couple of unprocessed collections to begin with, because we wanted them to be able to see materials pertaining to LGBTQ plus and women's issues. And we had the records which were unprocessed and just newly processed from collections dealing with these two topics. And it's very obvious when it comes to the records pertaining to our LGBTQ Center, which actually started in about 2002. The collection that we have is very small. And I would say there's probably not as much record material as there would be more kind of ephemeral material. But in explaining to the class, and they were just wondering how could this be such a small collection, I explained to them that a lot of the collection, since it's part of an umbrella group of our university life unit, which is a huge unit, academic and administrative unit, with 40 different units under it. A lot of those records are at the higher up office, at the the Office of University Life, and the things in the LGBTQ plus collection really are the things that were, mostly publications that they created and things like that, and advertising for programming and stuff like that, but not a lot of the kind of the big history records which were being kept up there. So it does, and by the same token, they looked at other collections that were complete all the way back to 1960. It just depends on the group of records that you have. And I think they kind of understood that. As a matter of fact, with LGBTQ plus Center, they actually followed up and went and interviewed folks who worked and currently work there, did oral history interviews. So in a way, they were sort of helping us supplement the collection in that way. by doing the extra legwork there. I hope that helps a little bit.
I can also add, one day of class, we had a guest speaker who, George Oberly, who is our history librarian and also the director for Center for Mason Legacies, which is researching the history of the enslaved people of George Mason and the George Mason family, as well as the African American and Black communities that have been around like the Fairfax campus areas, and how the campus has sort of encroached on some of those areas. And so he talked a lot about like how do you piece together parts of the history when there are pieces missing, go. And I'll say the other thing that this reminds me of is there was a student who asked multiple times and was like, it was one of those, are we not giving them the answer that they want? What do you do when the organization, in this case, the university, doesn't want a record held in the institutional memory? And so we talked through that and how it's a reminder of like, here's what we collect and why we collect it. Here is how we get things into the archive. And that there's supplemental instruction about like, okay, so if you're not finding what you're looking for here, maybe you need to go look at local newspapers to fill in some gaps. Maybe you need to look at some other documentation outside of the archives to sort of fill in what is missing or what you think might be missing, etc. Any other questions? Great.
We have a new question. How many credits was the class and how often did you meet?
It was a 3-credit course, undergraduate, and it met twice a week for an hour and 15 minutes for 15 weeks.
Yeah, and I think you all came into SCRC maybe like 15 times or something like that.
Yes, it was a good chunk of time, and a lot of those times were sort of work days.
Yeah, and there was a lot of, I would guess it could have been described as long-winded lecture parts in the seminar room. But we didn't lose anybody, but we like to talk about what we do and give them all the details. I think after the first couple of weeks, I think they're really happy to go, to get down to working with the materials.
Rebecca asked if any of you received supplemental pay for the class.
Great question. So, my role as the instructor of record is actually as an adjunct faculty member. So we are administrative professional faculty in the library. All the three of us, myself, Bob, and Mieko, which is different than instructional faculty. So if we teach courses, we are able to teach one course as adjunct faculty, which gets us adjunct faculty rating. To be clear, only I received that. And this was something I thought very strongly about and why I was very concerned about over taxing Bob and Mieko. But I can also add that we have an internal reward program that I was very easy to and happy to nominate Bob and Mieko for, which they received and did receive some money for all of their work in this class, which is not a perfect solution, but was one I was very happy to do.
Yeah, it was appreciated. But yeah, unfortunately, we did not have
Yeah.
an avenue to do that.
And I wasn't expecting it anyway, so I was really surprised. As a matter of fact, my wife said, "How come you got an extra like $500 on your pay?" Because I don't even look at my pay stubs. How come how come you have this extra money? I go, "Oh, that must have been our new raise coming through," because I didn't know. I thought maybe we got our cost of living or something. But really, I do this for free. I mean, I like to gab about, what we do and what we have here. I mean, it's literally my fun. So
So another question, did your students also use legacy websites from Mason, from the Internet Archive, or from other internal web collections for their research? If they used websites, what were their experiences working with web archives?
Great question. I tried to get some students to use the Internet Archive a few times, and they were just like, an extra step. And I can't remember, there was one really specific example. They're like, this should exist. Why doesn't it exist anymore? I think in one instance, there was like a short-lived student newspaper that I was trying to tell them they could use the Internet Archive to see how it existed. This is not a website. One group attempted to use, this was like a meme in the class. They attempted to use another archival collection on campus for the folklore center. But the folklore archive could literally not get a cabinet unlocked the entire semester. So like the main collections they needed was in a locked cabinet that they couldn't get unlocked all semester. Right, a classic, exactly. I was like, you're getting like the true experience here. And like they kept asking me like, what can we do? I was like, I don't know, like you got to talk to them. Maybe they could get campus police to help. I don't know. But other than other websites beyond sort of like our Luna-based collections, nothing comes to mind. Bob, Mieko, does anything?
Yeah, I was just thinking that we have this Omeka site about the history of the university, and it was literally done almost 15 years ago. So, we've kind of updated a little bit, but it's in, clunky classic Omeka. Hopefully, I think they spent a lot of time on that.
They did.
Because there are like 65 stories of like university things, and how they came to be. That site's almost an antique and belongs on the Internet Archive. But yeah, I didn't get any questions to that effect, but I love using the Wayback Machine because that's how I find a lot of stuff that way.
That Omeka site was required reading as part of like
Yeah.
the background history of the university.
Let's see, did students have the option to create a final project that was not web-based?
They did. No one wanted to do it. And I reminded them multiple times. I was like, if you want to do something different, you can. And they were like, no, we're good. And some of them did some interesting, like they figured out how to do some interesting things on Omeka that like beyond my capacity, honestly. So they were excited and I think comfortable with that sort of, web-based platform in general. I didn't require a lot of hand-holding to do sort of the basic Omeka usage.
Yeah, we had some neat like GPS projects within some of their sites, which I thought was pretty cool.
Like even we literally realized there was something wrong with the Omeka site yesterday in our final prep, and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad we found it, right? So like we're learning too sometimes.
Yeah, we were like, where are all the pictures? There should be pictures. We know they took them. And it was just like a setting, privacy setting. So now it's all available. So if you click on the link that we shared, you'll see it in all its glory.
And you'll see the projects are of varying, levels of success, but I would say that minimally they all passed, I think, the bar set for a pilot course and helped us identify some of the issues around topics in particular.
And I think you never know, but I mean, we have a pretty good track record of attracting people to the archives profession who come through classes or do projects. I mean, I can count on 10 fingers how many people I've known since 1993 who've come through special collections for something and are archivists now. And there's probably one or two of them in today's audience, I would guess.
Yeah, I would say 2 students identified as they were interested in archival or like archive/museum careers. They left still feeling that way. In fact, in some cases, even more so. And then I had one student who was like, I might be curious now about being a librarian or archivist. And so those were fun office hours conversations to have. And then because like the one student was like environmental science major. She's like, could I do this? I was like, oh my gosh, we need so many of you in this field. Please, please, if you're interested.
I have a follow-up question to a question somebody else asked about. It sounds like they had a lot of in-class time to work on this. Did any of them come back on their own, either because they needed to, because they didn't finish what they were doing, or because, more importantly, maybe because they wanted to?
Mhm. We had a couple of students come in on their own time to look through some materials, and I think for most of it was that they wanted to spend a little bit more time like individually to look at some of the records and form their some of their thoughts on them. We also had students come back to take photos, because we had said you need to have X number of photos, or you need to like be showcasing some materials, and we had said during the class like take as many photos as you want, but still there were a couple who had they had gotten photos but they didn't like the glare that was on the photo itself, and like they just wanted to come in to look at that. So we had a couple of those people, and at the end too we had a couple of people who were like, I'd love to come back in at some point to like look at something else. And we're always trying to get people to come back after we have these classes with them. We'll be like, remember, you can come in to special collections. And the one barrier is we do ask that people make appointments. So that can be a bit of a sticking point, especially for students with their schedules can be all over the place. But I think at least being like, now they know that we're here, and they also know who they can contact to set stuff up. So hopefully we do have some return people. I know a lot of people are graduating too from that class, but
And we had one whole group who came by, made an appointment to come and just talk about oral history. So we went, we talked about oral history for like an hour and how they could do it. And they said, well, this is great. We're going to do the oral history in about 15 minutes. So thanks for this. And they literally went, after our session, they went over and did the oral history.
And the other thing I'll add is the tour of SERC, the archival collection was like really inspiring, particularly for the students who wanted to come back to like, so we have the Appalachian Trail Conservatory collection, and there was a few students who were really interested in like, they asked like, I think one student was like, do you have like biological specimens, or like, do you have like the genetic history of the plants? And someone saw the name Zelda on a collection, and they were like, do you have like the Nintendo collection? I was like, very different Zelda, but like, let's talk about the arena stage collection. But I was also able to show them in that instance, like, okay, so you saw the word Zelda, let's go search that in A space and see what shows up. And so it was a little teachable moment, but that sort of behind the scenes tour, I think, really piqued some of their interests as well. Our time's wrapping up, but like if anyone wants to see the syllabus, I'm more than happy to share. Just send me a note, and you can see last spring, and once the fall one's ready, I'm happy to share that one too. Just as I'm a midnight oil burner, so that one will be ready for a little bit.
yeah, and if there's if you're still kind of thinking about questions, or you reflect and you realize you have something you want to ask us, our emails are on this slide. We can get them in the chat too. And feel free to reach out to us.
And come by and visit us someday.
That's right. Thank you all.